Hi everyone, it's Margaret. I'm here today to present my reflection on some critical takeaways and important terms from the course EDU 387. Critical takeaways from this course are, most importantly, education is not one size fits all, and everyone can learn. I don't think that these takeaways are necessarily specific to this exact course. In fact, I've found that they are kind of a theme throughout all of my EDU and SED courses, which I think is very important because they are key pieces of education and where we want education to be in moving forward and being more accepting and inclusive. So the takeaways specifically from this course, however, are all students are entitled and deserve an appropriate and inclusive education. This is both morally and legally important through IDEA. Communication, respect, empathy, and a willingness to adapt are also keys in being an inclusive teacher with a welcoming class environment. Most of the inclusive practices are simply good practices for all teachers. It's things that can be shared and put in place in any classroom, not just an SED classroom or a classroom with a student with an IEP or a learning disability in any way. They're just good practices for all teachers. So IDEA, which is the Individuals with Disabilities Education Act, as I mentioned before, is a requirement of public schools to provide special education and related services to eligible students. There are 13 categories, and one or more are required to be deemed an eligible student. So the learning disability of the child has to adversely affect their education, and it has to be proven to fall into one of these 13 categories or more. Not every student who struggles in school will qualify, although I do believe these categories are overarching enough that most students will find a way to get services, and if they aren't deemed directly special ed, there are other services the school can offer, and inclusion in the classroom can help students who are struggling but aren't necessarily deemed special ed. Since I am a student with a special ed concentration, none of these terms in this class were new to me. Rather, it was more of a review, which I found helpful because I think it deepened my knowledge and it made some of these things that I had learned back in sophomore year a little bit fresher and a little bit more in the forefront of my mind as I'm preparing to enter student teaching and all of that. So I decided to come up with important terms that I feel are necessary to take away from this course for someone who might not have already been exposed to these before. Especially since SED lingo can be difficult to understand, it's really important to become familiar with these terms and to communicate frequently with parents and help parents understand these terms as well. So my first term is an IEP, or an Individualized Education Plan. It's created by an IEP team and made up of measurable goals and intended to be a guideline for student success and progress, and it is a legal document. Next term is differentiation, which is a reactive method, and it includes alternative ways to learn into the instruction to meet the needs of all learners. It's centered around content, process, product, and environment, which are all areas where one can differentiate to individualize their teaching to their students. The next term is the LRE, or the least restrictive environment, and this is that students should spend as much time as possible with their peers in an environment that supports their differences. So students should be able to be exposed to their peers and the mainstream classroom as much as possible because that is where they are meant to be, and a classroom should be able to accommodate and be able to include these students into their curriculum. The next set of terms I thought were very important were the cognitive and associative processing or tasks. So you can only do one cognitive task at a time, but you can do 2 or more associative tasks at a time. The example that was given in our class was that you can drive and talk at the same time because they are both associative. But for children with learning disabilities, speaking and listening is actually a cognitive process, meaning that listening and writing notes and taking everything in can be impossible for them to do. And it's important for teachers and educators to realize that these tasks that we believe are associative tasks aren't associative for students with learning disabilities. And my last term is RTI, or response to intervention. This is a method for determining why or how a student is struggling. It is not special education entirely, or at all really. It's more of a method to determine special ed placements, and also if they do not fall into the IDEA category, it can help determine what the teacher needs to do to better assist the student. So now what? What am I going to take from this class, and how am I going to incorporate it into my future teaching? I pledge to create an inclusive classroom where all learners are valued and allowed to learn and grow through personalized instruction that is created to fit each of their individual needs. And I will do so through something like this inclusivity statement that we created in class. Education isn't one size fits all, and all of the students bring value and unique talents to their classrooms, and I feel each student has the ability to learn and be successful. It's meant to be a welcome and inclusive environment and nurture the growth of young minds. I have a list of how inclusion starts and some statements that I believe I would put up in my classroom for creating an inclusive environment and setting some inclusive rules and boundaries in my classroom. And that's my project.